Hello, brothers and sisters. Welcome back to our study of the seven churches. But today we're moving on to Smyrna, one of only two good churches that Jesus addresses. They get no reprimands, only encouragement. And it's interesting to notice what Jesus approves about this church. I hope it will really lay heavy on our hearts. Now, what they're going through, though, reminds me a lot of the persecuted church. To such an extreme that I'm actually going to put in the description a website for the Voice of the Martyrs, an organization that actually helps the persecuted church. Hopefully you'll be encouraged by what they're going through to the point of maybe helping them out. Because they provide not just financially for their life, but also spiritually, Bibles and training for pastors and stuff. It's a very necessary thing for our persecuted brothers and sisters. And as Paul says in 2 Corinthians, those who have more are called upon to give to those who have less. And that's what we want to do. Like I said, it's one of the few good churches that only gets encouragement by Jesus. But wait until we see what the encouragements really are. Let's look at it together. And to the angel of the church in Smyrna, write the words of the first and the last, who died and came to life. As I said, in chapter 1, we get that description in part, and it's used here. And there's a reason for it. What he says here in his description really hits home to the church of Smyrna. When you realize that the city itself had a specific divinity or deity, a god, Dionysus. Dionysus was the god of mystery and of the land, of the cycle of life, I should say. How crops live and die. That kind of mystery there. And then what does Jesus say? He's the one that's the first, life and death. Right? The beginning and the end. Almost like he's saying, I'm superior to this God of Smyrna. And don't miss also the fact that this presentation is showing a God who is the first and the last, the two extremes. The one who was dead and now he's alive, the two extremes. These two extremes will come into play as we look at what's going on in Smyrna. So, he's attacking their God, like God, like the Lord did with Moses and Egypt. And at the same time, he's reminding them, I'm in control of the beginning and the end, of the two extremes. Now we see what's going on in Smyrna. I know your tribulation and your poverty, but you are rich, and the slander of those who say that they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. There's something missing here. I know, and he doesn't say your works, your perseverance, like he did with Ephesus. Like he's going to do with other churches too. Other bad churches will be told, I know the good works you're doing. But for them, it's, I know your tribulation, poverty, and the slander that they're living. This is what Jesus looks at this church and says, that's what I'm focused on. Your sufferings. It so goes beyond modern Christianity. What's so focused about success and doing great things. And of course, Jesus is happy with that. And here's Jesus saying, I'm looking at Smyrna and I'm focusing on their tribulations, their poverty, and their slander they're going through. Striking, isn't it? This is what Jesus considers important for them. Something we tend to flee from. He says, that's what's important about this church. That's what I'm focused on. That's what I care about. Tribulation is what it literally means to be pressed in by two sides. Think of Star Wars. Luke and Chewbacca and the other ones stuck between two walls coming in and crushing them. Or Indiana Jones for that matter. The two walls coming in to crush them. Here's when I come back to how Jesus presented himself. He's the one that's at one extreme, beginning, and the other extreme, the end. These two walls could have been religion, the Jews, and the government, which we'll see in the next verse. And when you look nowadays in the persecuted church, we see the same thing. On one side, you got religions like Hinduism, Buddhism, or Muslims, Islam, I should say. And on the side, the government are pressing in against Christians in different areas. Again, Jesus is the one who's the beginning and the end. I reign over both sides. I'm in control of both these things. Don't worry. This thing when it talks about their poverty. You look poor, but you're rich. Not in the kind of prosperity gospel, you're richer than you think and let's get money. No, in the sense they're spiritually rich. See, they're the complete contrast of Laodicea, who was physically very rich, just like many churches nowadays, but spiritually very poor, to the point of even saying they might have been dead in their sins. We'll get to that, though, when we get to them. On the flip side, though, Smyrna might have seemed physically poor, but were spiritually very rich. We see this kind of thing going on in Hebrews. We find out in an epistle that some of them had their goods taken away. And again, there's nothing new under the sun. In places like China, where the government's cracking down on Christians, you don't want to renounce your faith, they make sure you lose your job, you lose your home, and usually the kids. They take away everything from them. And that's just one example. It just keeps going. They have the physical poverty, but they're spiritually rich. When you read testimonies on Voice of the Martyrs about people who lost everything, and yet they talk about how close and intimate Christ is with them, they say, no, that's richness. Just like Jesus is saying here. And yet there is some slander going on. Slander literally means that you do not see something good about someone, therefore you speak ill of them. I cannot see anything positive. I can only talk about you in a negative way, which is what the Jews were doing about the Christians. Even though the Christian faith says we're worshiping Yahweh and his natural continuation, right? When this new covenant was promised, we're talking about that. For these Jews, they're looking at this and saying, that's no way related to what we believe in. We reject it fully. There's nothing good about it. No way it even comes close to the true Yahweh we believe in. Which, again, it's the same thing around the world. These different religions look at Christians serving in their community, helping people, and say, no, there's nothing good about them. We even see it here, actually, in North America and Canada, where I live. Christians do amazing things, and yet they're just seen as hypocrites and haters and stuff like that. They don't see the good. They just speak ill. Now, the fact he calls them a synagogue of Satan doesn't mean literally they were worshiping Satan. It's imagery language. Because at this point, the temple is gone. So they've made up a new version of Judaism, which is what we have now even. A made-up version that is nothing like the Old Testament religion God established. Nothing. So yeah, their synagogue is not worshiping the true God. One, because Christ came, but two, because it's nothing like the old one even. They think they're true Israelites, as Paul would say, but they're not. It's harsh language, and I'm not the one saying it, but Paul is. Jesus is saying it. And he's not finished yet. At this point, you're thinking, okay, he's going to say, but things are going to get better. Yeah, let's see what he says next. Do not fear what you're about to suffer. Behold, the devil is about to throw some of you into prison, that you may be tested. And for 10 days you will have tribulation. But, no, be faithful unto death, and I will give you the crown of life. Things aren't going to get better. They're going to get much, much worse. Not a message you're going to hear in most churches, and very few Christian churches, I should say. Because we tend to make put the accent, the emphasis on you're suffering, but it's for promotion. It's for blessings. Things will get better. Things will come to fruition. That's what you're suffering. So you get a great ministry out of it. And Jesus is telling them it's going to get worse. Throughout Christian history, and with our brothers and sisters around the world, it doesn't always get better. Even I would say For most of them, it just gets worse. They're kicked out by their family, their wives, their children denounce them. They're going to chase them out and end up in prison, and then they die there. That's the reality. It gets from worse to worse to worse. It doesn't get better here on earth. Here on earth. What Smyrna is going to go through, he says, do not fear that. And I understand he has to say it, because he's going to tell them some really bad stuff. After saying, I know you're suffering, but it's going to get worse, but don't be afraid of that. Why? Because again, he's the one that's the beginning and the end, controlling both walls. So yes, the Jews are doing one thing, and we see Satan's going to do something else. Probably not literally him, but the powers of evil are going to guide the government into putting you in jail. But behind that, it's me. The one who's the beginning and the end. Don't forget that. So some of them get thrown in prison, like it happened also in Hebrews. And this is to be tested. Yeah, don't miss that very important part. The reason for it is to be tested. To be put in the testing chambers. To be made better. To be sanctified. Peter says in 1 Peter that these things you're going through, the fiery trials you're going through, is to purify your faith. And interestingly enough, all through 1 Peter, he'll never say anything like, it's going to get better. And this will give you better ministries. No, he says, you're going to suffer. Do it while doing good. And the point of it all is not so things get better, it's to purify your faith. Just like he's saying here. All of this has one purpose, to purify you. That's the idea of testing, to put you in the fire, to remove the dross, to remove the sin. And if you think you don't need it, then you're prideful, you need it even more. We constantly need to be tested and purified, because we're far from the image of Christ. They're going to be tested. And he says, for 10 days, they're going to have the tribulation. It's probably not a literal 10 days, because the number 10 is, again, imagery language. It speaks of completion, of the top, the zenith. Think of how the Lord tells Israelites in the desert, you've tested me, tempted me, bothered me 10 times now. Not literally, it was probably way more than that he murmured against him. But he's saying, to the max. That's the idea of 10 usually in the Bible, to its top, to its zenith, to the max. And it's therefore probably referring to the fact that you're going to go through a tribulation to its main accomplishment, to the most it could go to, which is, of course, to make it like Christ. Yeah, all things work together for our good. But that good, verse 29 tells us, is to make us like Christ, or to glorify us. You're going to go through trials and testing. That's the point of what's going on. It's going to be a 10-day event in the sense it's going to bring you to completion, which is, of course, to look like Christ. That's the point. That's what Peter talks about, and Paul, and now Jesus himself telling the church of Smyrna, this is what you're going through. This is the point of it all. And I would say that's exactly the same kind of stuff that Paul talks about in 1 Corinthians chapter 10. When he talks about our trials and tribulation, it says, no temptation, same word for trial, no difficulty, no testing has overtaken you that is not common to men. In other words, it's very normal. Everyone goes through it. God is faithful. And he will not let you be tested beyond your ability. And usually we stop there. But we're not supposed to. See, it will be exactly what you need, right? 10 days, completion. It will be exactly what you need. But with the temptation, with that test, he will also provide the way of escape. Again, that's not the point. It's not just that you'll get out of it and it's going to end someday. It's that you may be able to endure it. You can go through everything that God wants you to make you more like Christ. The 10 days needs to be fulfilled. Right? The bell has to ring. Ding! The oven's finished. You've been cooked perfectly into the image of Christ. I don't worry too much. It's not the idea of if you're participant enough. It's usually when we make the mistake. God's testing you, and if you fail that test, He's gonna have to do it again. The Bible doesn't talk about that. It actually talks about the fact that God started and finished the good work. That God does through us what is pleasing to Him. He's the one that makes sure these tests accomplish what it means. So even if you feel like you failed it, that's probably exactly what you needed to go through. Needed to happen to keep you humble. We have so much pride to kill in us. But I digress. We understand what he's talking about now with Smyrna. This is what they're going to go through to make it just right. And the way of escape for them is not on earth. It's a crown of life. It's after. It's death. Like he says here, right? Be faithful unto death. Some of them are going to die. Probably many of them are going to die through this horrible trial they're going to go through. And that's why he gives the one command. Be faithful. Persevere. Stay strong unto death. Because ultimately what you're going to get is life. Remember how he described himself. He's the one that went through death all the way onto life. He can take your hand when you die and bring you all the way to the newness of life. That's what you're going to get. The fact he mentions a crown may be connected to the priests of Dionysus. When they had served faithfully for many years, it was time for retirement, they would get a crown, showing that they were faithful to Dionysus. Might be what Jesus is hinting at here again. Of course, we know that there are crowns of faithfulness that we then give back to Christ because he helped us went through it. He got all the way to the end. Still, what is the way of escape? Not that things are going to get better on earth, which they do sometimes, but it's eternal life. That's a great hope. As he concludes, like he usually does. He who has an ear, hopefully us, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. The one who conquers will not be hurt, but a second death. This is when you start seeing that as much as there is certainly a specific way that he expressed himself to each of the churches about this reward, a specific way. That's where I made a mistake. There's a specific way, but it's still the same reward. Go back to Ephesus for just an instant. Ephesus is the church that had purposely abandoned their first love and a recall to bring it back. And he used the imagery of the garden, where Adam purposely gave up his first love of intimacy with God for the fruit. Going that back to that garden in a right way, using language of intimacy that they would get. Most same thing here. They're the ones that are suffering, remember? That's the good thing he sees in this church. They're suffering. And he says it's going to get worse. But guess what, though? You're not going to hurt. Again, suffering more language. You're not going to suffer the second death, which is, of course, eternal punishment. You are going to die, but you won't suffer the second death. Using language they understand, but to talk about eternal intimacy, which we all get, to be with God forever. To be with our God in a glorified state for all eternity. If they're faithful, if they persevere. Not persevere as in do stuff. That's the mistake people make with the book of Hebrews. That they think the whole book is about if you sin too much or something, you'll lose your salvation. No. The whole book of Hebrews is stop counting on stuff you do or other blood of animals or other religion and remain focused on Christ. Persevere in Him being your only hope. His blood being your only chance before God. Persevere in that reality, no matter what's going on. Then you'll make it to the end. That's the same thing he's telling Smyrna and us. Now, like I said, this is something that completely goes beyond our heads because we're not going through that here in the West. We're not. But that doesn't mean that we can't sympathize, therefore, and have a heart broken over what our brothers and sisters are going through. So that's why I'm putting that link in the bottom there in the description. So you can find out and see if you could help and participate in some way, even in prayer. I'm grateful that my church, a few months before Christmas, my church got together and many wrote letters and notes of encouragement to the persecuted church sent through by Voice in the Waters, because they wanted to tell them, we're praying for you guys. They want to show support for what they're going through. That's good. But we could also apply what's going on in this text to ourselves. Like I said, we are going through tribulations. There's going to be slander for your faithfulness to God. People are not going to see that you're honoring God and you're doing something good. And things will get sometimes worse, because ultimately it's about being tested to perfection, to be sanctified and ultimately glorified. So that's the message that should be repeated over and over again in our churches nowadays, like it was before, like it should always have been. We need to come back to that message. Not things are going to get better and get blessed. No, things can get worse, but the whole point is to be tested to perfection so you can enter into glory. The whole point is that crown of life, that eternal life with Christ. And just be a good reminder to us, dear brothers and sisters, and on this note, be blessed.